Jason had barely set his bag down at his new office desk when the familiar ripple of whispers began. He didn't need to strain to hear. The tone of hushed mockery for his identity was universal, the words less important than the intent behind them. Jason stared at his screen, the glow of spreadsheets and emails blurring together. Numbers were supposed to be orderly, logical, but today they offered no solace. He could feel it, the prickling awareness of eyes on him, dissecting him, always on him. At lunch, the break room provided no relief. A group huddled near the fridge, their voices carrying over the low hum of the microwave. Jason kept his head down, his focus on the worn plastic fork in his hand. The tightness in his chest betrayed him, but he stayed silent. "Guess some people need extra attention," one of them said, just loud enough to carry. The microwave beeped, and Jason's shoulders stiffened. He inhaled slowly, willing himself to stay calm. The laughter swelled behind him, sharp and deliberate. He kept his gaze on his food, perfected in the art of invisibility. "That's enough." The voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of command. Jason turned, startled, to see Ryan Harper standing in the doorway. Polished, confident Ryan Harper, with his perfect suits and practice calm. The kind of person who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. The laughter sputtered out, the offenders suddenly engrossed in their coffees and phones. Jason blinked, unsure if he was more shocked by the silence or the fact that it was Ryan who had caused it. Ryan wasn't someone he knew well. He was one of MeadowCorp's star performers, respected but distant. He had the kind of quiet charisma that made him unapproachable. "You okay?" Ryan asked, his tone quieter now. Jason hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah." Ryan's expression softened briefly before he turned and left, leaving Jason with a mix of gratitude and confusion. It wasn't the last time Ryan came to his defense. Whenever Jason found himself cornered by his co-workers' biting remarks, Ryan was always there. It didn't matter if it was in the break room, near the coffee machine, or in passing glances that carried unspoken insults. Ryan's steady presence cut through the tension every time. Over the following weeks, Jason began to notice him more. At first, it was in passing, a brief nod in the hallway, a polite good morning that carried a surprising warmth. Then there were the little things. A coffee cup left on Jason's desk without explanation, a quick question about his workload that felt genuine. Jason started looking forward to these moments, even though he barely understood them. One evening, Jason was hunched over his computer, trying to make sense of an impossible deadline, when Ryan appeared at his desk. "Burning the midnight oil?" Ryan asked, setting down 2 paper cups. Jason glanced up, startled. "You didn't have to." Ryan shrugged, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "Figured you could use a pick-me-up." Jason hesitated, but accepted the coffee. "Thanks." They sat in silence for a while, the quiet of the office settling around them. Jason found himself stealing glances at Ryan, who seemed lost in thought. There was a tension in his posture, something unresolved. "Long day?" Jason asked, breaking the silence. Ryan exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "Something like that." Jason waited, sensing there was more. When Ryan finally spoke, his voice was softer, more vulnerable. "People like to think they know who you are," he said. "They take one look and decide what box to put you in. It's easier that way." Jason frowned, his curiosity piqued. "Yeah, I know the feeling." Ryan's lips quivered into a faint smile. "I imagine you do." Jason hesitated, then asked, "What about you? Do they get it right?" Ryan's smile faded, his gaze dropping to the coffee cup in his hands. His fingers traced the rim absently. "Sometimes," he said finally. "Mostly, they see what I let them see." The words lingered in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Jason wanted to ask more, but something in Ryan's tone stopped him. Instead, he said softly, "That must get exhausting." Ryan looked at him then, his expression unreadable. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "It does." The next few weeks blurred together in a series of small but meaningful interactions. Ryan started showing up more often, always with some excuse, a question about a project, a quick joke to lighten the mood, another coffee cup left on Jason's desk. Jason found himself looking forward to these moments more than he cared to admit. Ryan had a way of making him feel seen, even in the smallest gestures. But there was something else, too. A tension that hummed just beneath the surface of their interactions. Jason noticed in the way Ryan's gaze lingered a little too long sometimes, in the hesitation in his voice when their conversations veered too close to personal territory. It was a connection Jason couldn't quite define, but he felt it all the same. Then, one Friday evening, long after most of the office had emptied for the weekend, Ryan appeared at Jason's desk with his jacket slung over his shoulder. "You're still here?" Ryan asked, his tone lighter than usual. Jason smiled sheepishly. "Apparently, spreadsheets are my exciting Friday plans." Ryan smirked, leaning casually against the desk. "Tragic." Jason chuckled, but the sound faltered as Ryan studied him. "Come on," Ryan said suddenly. "You've earned a break." Jason blinked, caught off guard. "A break?" "Yeah, let's grab a drink." Jason hesitated, unsure of what to say. The look in Ryan's eyes stopped him. It wasn't just an invitation. It was something vulnerable, unspoken. Like he needed this as much as Jason did. "Okay," Jason said finally. "Sure." They ended up at a quiet bar not far from the office. The lighting was dim, the hum of conversation low enough to create a sense of privacy. Jason ordered a beer. Ryan opted for whiskey. They settled into a booth near the back, the space between them feeling both too small and too vast. For a while, their conversation was light. Work anecdotes, childhood stories, harmless jokes. But as the evening wore on and the drinks loosened their nerves, the conversation shifted. "Have you ever been in love before?" Jason asked, the words slipping out before he could second-guess them. Ryan's hand froze, his jaw tightened for a split second, and then he let out a soft breath. "There was someone. He meant a lot to me," Ryan said finally, his voice quiet. "It was a long time ago, but it didn't work out. That's why I am the way I am now. Always pretending to be someone I'm not." Jason blinked, the word, he hanging in the air between them like a spark. He opened his mouth to respond, but stopped himself. Had Ryan really just said that? Or was Jason reading too much into it? Jason's chest tightened at the way Ryan said it, like he wasn't just talking about dating, but something deeper. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze searching Ryan's face. "You don't have to pretend with me, you know," he said softly. Ryan's hand paused midway to his drink. He looked at Jason, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Jason thought he'd crossed the line, that Ryan was going to brush him off or shut him out. Ryan seemed to realize his slip immediately and shook his head, as though dismissing his own vulnerability, and gave Jason a small, almost apologetic smile. "Don't worry about me," he said. "I'm fine. But tell me about you. Have you ever been in love?" Jason hesitated, thrown off by the sudden shift. Not really," he admitted. "I mean, I've dated, but nothing that lasted. Nothing real." Ryan nodded slowly, as though he understood. "It's hard," he said quietly. "Letting someone in?" But Jason wasn't convinced. Jason couldn't help but feel that the man sitting across from him was carrying a weight far heavier than he let on. The days that followed were different. Ryan seemed lighter somehow, as though the conversation at the bar had given him permission to be himself, at least with Jason. They grew closer, their bond deepening with every shared moment. Jason found himself drawn to Ryan in ways he couldn't fully explain, and he could sense that Ryan felt it too. But Ryan still held back, a part of him guarded, as though he was afraid to let Jason see too much. Jason tried to be patient, to give him the space he needed, but it was hard not to wonder what it would take for Ryan to let go of his fear. The answer came sooner than Jason expected. It was another late night at the office when everything came to a head. Jason was organizing files at his desk when he heard the sharp rise of voices from Ryan's office. He froze, recognizing the baritone growl of Mr. Alden's anger. "I expect better from you, Harper," Alden said. His voice carried through the walls. "You're supposed to set an example." "I am setting an example," Ryan replied, his tone sharp but calm. "I'm standing up for what's right. By defending someone who's too sensitive to fit in here." Alden shot back. "This isn't a place for babysitting." Jason's stomach twisted, his fists clenching at his sides. He hadn't realized how much Ryan's support had cost him. "You're out of line," Ryan said, his voice cutting through the tension. Jason is one of the most competent people on this team. If you can't see that, it's your failure, not his. Alden's voice lowered into a snarl. Careful, Harper. People are starting to wonder why you're so invested in him. If I didn't know better, I'd think you had feelings for her. That's enough, Ryan interrupted, his voice steady and unflinching. You can think what you like. I'm done pretending to care about your opinions. Jason stood frozen outside the door, the words reverberating through his chest. He couldn't just stay silent, not after everything Ryan had risked. His heart racing, Jason stepped into the office. Both men turned as he entered. Alden's face was flushed with irritation, but Ryan's expression softened into something unreadable. Jason, Ryan said, startled. What are you? I heard everything, Jason said, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. He looked Alden directly in the eye. I don't know what you think, but Ryan is the best leader I've ever worked with. If you can't see that, you're the one who doesn't belong here. Alden sputtered, his face darkening. This isn't your place to. It is, Jason interrupted, his voice rising. Because if standing up for each other is a problem here, then maybe I don't belong either. Alden's lips pressed into a thin line. He looked between them for a moment, then stormed out of the office without another word. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Jason turned to Ryan, his chest heaving. You didn't have to do that, Ryan said softly, his eyes searching Jason's face. Jason shook his head. Yes, I did. Because you've done it for me. Over and over. Ryan hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. It wasn't just for you, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Jason's breath caught. What do you mean? Ryan looked up then, meeting Jason's eyes. For the first time, his walls were down, his emotions laid bare. I mean, I've spent so much of my life pretending to be the person everyone expects me to be. Pretending I didn't feel things I wasn't supposed to feel. Jason's heart pounded as Ryan stepped closer, his voice soft but steady. But when I'm with you, I don't want to pretend anymore. You make me feel like I can be myself, like I don't have to hide. Jason stared at him, the weight of Ryan's words sinking in. Ryan, he started, his voice trembling. I'm in love with you, Jason, Ryan said, his voice firm despite the vulnerability in his eyes. I don't know when it happened, but it's real, and I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. Jason felt the air rush out of his lungs. He opened his mouth to respond, but the lump in his throat stopped him. Instead, he reached out, his hand brushing Ryan's. You don't have to pretend with me either, Jason said, his voice cracking slightly. You never did. I've been falling for you this whole time, but I didn't think. Ryan cut him off with a soft laugh, relief washing over his face. You didn't think I felt the same? Jason nodded, his smile breaking through the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. Yeah, something like that. Ryan smiled back, his hand squeezing Jason's. Well, now you know. The next day, Ryan submitted his resignation. I can't stay here and keep hiding who I am, he told Jason that morning. Jason understood, though the thought of losing him at work was bittersweet. But Ryan didn't leave Jason behind. Their relationship grew stronger as Ryan moved on to a new job, one where he didn't have to pretend anymore. And Jason, inspired by Ryan's courage, started living with the same authenticity. Together, they found a love that didn't need hiding, a love that made them both braver. Ryan had pretended to be someone he wasn't for too long, but by letting Jason into his life, he found the strength to stop pretending and gave Jason the courage to do the same.